Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Clyde Delby and you're watching the House of Gouldians. Before we get stuck into this week's episode, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Nancy and really a big thank you to you for the generous donation towards the channel. Donations towards the channel goes towards improvements ultimately for you as the viewer. So for example, like Nancy's donation, we're using it towards the new flights and box cages. Those box cages have perspex fronts with far wider bars, if you like, which is ultimately going to give you guys a lot better visibility. If you look at these two cages behind me, yes, the one with lighting is better than the one without, but still the white bars reflect the light, and as a result you don't get clear visibility of the birds. So it's quite important for me that we move to the new box cages where you guys will be able to see what's going on, and it will just make for an overall better experience for you. The other thing that we're going to be doing with donation money is looking at improving in the sound, looking at purchasing lapel mics, and then other camera equipment as necessary. So yeah, if you are interested in donating, there is a PayPal link at the top of the channel page that you can donate to. But yeah, once again, a thank you to Nancy. And yeah, in terms of today's episode, we're going to be looking at some spy cam photos and video of our yellow rum babies that have sort of gone from when we rung them, which you guys saw in, say, episode 15, and right through to now that they've fledged and they're busy being fed and weaning. So yeah, we're going to have a look at that today. And then we're also going to be talking in detail about the box cages that I referred to. Yeah, that's pretty much today's show, and I hope you enjoy it. In terms of the production version of our breeding boxes, there's a couple of changes that we made. So first of all, you'll notice that this is a single piece instead of a split roof. And the reason for changing that was so that we wouldn't have any sagging across the middle. We then made another change in that in the inside of the box we've put in this ledge for the nest box. There is clips on the front so that the box can't move out of position, but the idea behind the ledge is that I found with the feeders I was bumping the nest box on the prototype, which obviously disturbs the bird. So by putting that ledge there, that should prevent that problem. So this is the final configuration of the boxes going forward. I had to do a perch adjustment, and the reason for that is that Oda and Josephine, that bred very well for me last season, they normally breed deep into the season. They're not an early season breeder, but this year they just seem to be taking longer than normal. And observing them one day, I realized what was going on. In all the other cages, the birds, they jump up against the wire when they're wanting to investigate the nest box. And because of the perspex, they were not able to jump up against the wire as such. They would have to land directly on that perch coming from the box. Problem is with that perch being fairly short, it doesn't allow them to really have their wings open when they're sort of at the last final stages of coming into land, if you like. So I'm not saying they couldn't do it, but it discouraged them from going and investigating that perch. And I proved the point by putting a foreign object on the top of the cage on the opposite side, scaring them off this perch essentially, and then they would go and hang around at the back. So then I put something at the back, so they were forced to be, and they would rather sit on the floor than go up to that perch. And that's when I confirmed that they were battling with that particular perch. So I then went and added the additional perch, which is basically a straight line from there to there. And then from that perch they can then investigate and they can hop up onto the nest box perch. So that solved that problem completely. They're now in and out the box, and within 3 days of doing that modification they were building nest and basically preparing to lay eggs. So I know that that was the issue, and that solved it completely. So hence the additional perch. So cut a long story short, we've got our main perch on the opposite side to the stress perch at the back. We've got a essentially pre-nest box perch, if you like, so they can hop between the two. It's not ideal. I would have liked a bit of an angle, but that's why this perch is nice and low, which they go down to for food. So when they come and feed and drink, they can sit on that perch, and then they're getting that maximum exercise that you often hear me talking about. Right back to episode 1, I mentioned that, where we're wanting maximum flight capability. And that way the birds get the most exercise possible. Yeah, in terms of the rest of the box, you've seen it in the sort of prototype. So obviously we've got the tray and the nest box itself and all the rest of it, and we've spoken about the other changes. But this is the final configuration going forward. I'm very excited for next season. I think this is going to be great from a filming perspective and from a overall health and happiness of the birds. I just think this is a lot better system. I like the fact that the perspex blocks the seed from falling out, so there's no contamination from one cage to another, because quite often what happens is the stuff falls down and then it bounces back into the cage below it if it hits the top of a nest box or something like that. So yeah, it should be almost as if each pair is quarantined, if you like, and I suspect we're going to have even fewer issues than we already do in terms of illness and that. Talking about that, unfortunately we did lose one of our majestic bloodline hens. Unfortunately Victoria has passed away. She was fine the day before. There was no sign of illness, no sign of egg binding or anything funny, and yeah, I walked in the next day and she was dead on the ground. So it does happen. It's part of Gouldian finch keeping. I always joke that the difference between a parrot breeder and a finch breeder: parrot breeder walks into his aviary looking up to see where his birds are, whereas a finch breeder, we look on the ground to see where the bodies are. It's unfortunate, but it's part of the finch game. They're a lot smaller birds, they have a very high metabolism, and yeah, things can go wrong pretty quickly. And same as in humans. I mean, you and I never know when our time's coming. You might have a heart attack or whatever the case might be. It does happen. It was just unfortunate that it was one of our pairs that we were hoping to, or hens should I say, that we were hoping to breed with. So yeah, I'll sort of reconfigure the birds in terms of that. Let's move on to the spy cam footage now, where we're going to take a look at the yellow rump pair. Thought we'd have a look at the yellow rump chicks. So you can see the picture on the left was basically at the age I rang them, and then as they sort of grew up and progressed, you can see the yellow rump on the right hand bird in particular. It's very clear and distinct from the normal bird, so there's no doubt that they're born with that sort of feathering. It's not something that comes out when they get their adult colouring. The chicks from sort of day one, though, you can also notice on the forehead of a yellow rump versus the normal, there's like a white line just above the beak. So the two chicks with the yellow rumping, you'll notice that that sort of white line above the beak is there. Although that disappears when they get their adult colouring, as you can see in the cockbird in this video. So he's got the normal orange head, there's no white line above the beak. But yeah, when they're juveniles, it's sort of two ways you can tell. One, obviously the rump, two, the mottled sort of effect on the wings, and then obviously that that sort of pale feathering just above the beak. So yeah, these little guys are doing really, really well. They're being well fed. It's an excellent pair, and I'm actually going to be using this pair to then foster one of the pairs of blues that we have in the room that I particularly want chicks from this year. So now that I've got 5 chicks from these parents, and 2 of them being yellow rump, which gives us the 3 yellow rumps we need for next year, I'm now going to use them to effectively foster. So what I do there is I take the eggs from the pair that's breeding that I need to foster, and I'll swap them with their eggs. So it still gives the other pair a chance to raise chicks, and hopefully they're successful, but it guarantees that I'll get healthy chicks out, well, not healthy chicks, but I'll get chicks from the blue pair, because I know that these are particularly good parents. And I'm going to be doing that with 1 or 2 clutches this year. So in terms of the education segment for today's show, I thought we would talk about fostering in slightly more detail. You would have heard me mention it when we were looking at the yellow rum chicks now, that their parents are exceptional parents, and I'm wanting to use them as a fostering pair. So we have their genetics insured, if you like, in that we've bred 5 chicks from them. We have 2 yellow rums and 3 normal chicks with them. The pair, however, that I'm wanting to now swap eggs with is the blue pair. And the reason for this is that bluebirds are quite finicky, so I don't want to lose the cockbird before I've got some of his babies. And that's not to say we will, but you never know what might happen. And they, unfortunately, when they hatched their first lot of eggs, they didn't know what to do with them, so they didn't feed them, as you would have remembered from a previous episode when we were looking at the commoners. So what I decided to do was I took their eggs and I swapped them with the orange yellow rump pairing. So they're now looking after their eggs and vice versa. I'm doing this because I know that they will feed those chicks, they know what to do, and they will raise them to maturity. It doesn't mean necessarily that they'll all survive and all of that, but at least they've got the best possible chance. With the yellow rump eggs, this pair might now suddenly feed them and they might be fantastic parents, but I didn't want to take that risk. So, talking about fostering itself, there's some golden rules that I always stick to. So the first thing is I like to swap eggs in totality, and the reason I do that is so that you know that all the chicks from the clutch is from the opposite pair that you swap with. And the other rule is then that you make sure that the hatch date is within a week of each other. If it's longer than a week, the pair that's receiving the newer eggs are going to essentially abandon the nest because it's a week past the date that they should have hatched. So that is why I say one of the golden rules is that you stick within a week of the hatch date. You can, of course, do a partial swap if the hatch date is within a day, maximum 2 days of each other. And the reason why you don't want to go more than that is, remember, the chicks compete for food. So if it's more than 2 or 3 days difference, and you've got a mixed clutch of eggs, so there's that age gap, you're going to find that the younger chicks seldom make it because the older chicks are stealing all the food essentially. So that's another rule. So number one, try and stick within a week if you're doing a complete egg swap of the due dates. Secondly, if you're going to do a partial swap, make sure that they're within 2 days of each other in terms of hatch date. The other thing is that if you go and swap partial clutches, you then have a problem with which chicks belong to which parents. So from a genetics perspective, you know whose babies are whose, and it becomes a bit of a guessing game unless you being very clever with which eggs you're swapping. So for example, if I were to take this double factor cock to single factor yellow hens eggs and I had to do a partial egg swap, I know that any yellow chicks, if I put it with a normal pair, any yellow chicks would have to be theirs and any normal chicks would have to be the other pair. If it was a dilute cock, I wouldn't be guaranteed that, because I can theoretically from a dilute produce a green hen chick off that pairing, or more dilutes. So if you are going to do partial egg swaps, it's quite an important thing to remember is that you pick a pair that you can clearly distinguish whose chicks are whose. You can also do it with different head colors, so red-headed chicks with black-headed, or red-headed pair, should I say, was black-headed. But there's one catch. Remember, a red-headed cock could theoretically be carrying one copy of the black-headed gene. Because the red is dominant, he may appear to be a red-headed cock, but he may be carrying that single copy of black-head. Now, what would happen in that scenario is any hen offspring has a 50-50 chance of either being a red-headed or a black-headed hen. So once again, if you've now swapped or done a partial egg swap with a black-headed pair, you don't know for sure whether the hen offspring are indeed the black pair's offspring, or if they're the red-headed cockbird's offspring. So yeah, you've got to be very sure of your genetics if you're going to do partial egg swaps, is what I'm saying to you. The other thing that I sort of thought was worth mentioning with the fostering is that you'll notice I'm doing this Gouldian. I'm not so keen on fostering under society finches, and the reason is purely, if you look up on the internet and do a bit of research, there's some theories around that if you do it as a once-off, it's not a problem. So for example, I've got that pod. If I'm wanting to try and get as many eggs out of them as possible, then I can foster under Bengalese, and because it's one generation, it's not really going to make much of a difference. But the moment I start doing it permanently, so in other words, all Gouldian eggs that are laid I put under Bengalese, and I don't give the Gouldians a chance to raise their own chicks, over time, the theory is, and it's can't say it's been proven without a doubt, but the theory is that they would lose their ability to raise their own chicks. So in other words, you're breeding bad parentage into them. I don't know how true that is. It makes some sense, and there's certainly evidence of it. If you look at the trends in Europe, a lot of the breeders are fostering under Bengalese because they find the Gouldians can't raise their young. South Africa, it's a bit less of a problem because we generally frown upon fostering under Bengalese or society finches. However, having said that, they're not easy to breed their own youngsters. You've seen a lot with the first year chicks this season where they've chucked chicks, they haven't fed chicks, or they've stopped incubating halfway through, that kind of thing. And first year pairs are particularly difficult in terms of that. So I understand why the guys say that Gouldians don't make good parents, but if you persevere, you can build up a flock that are good at raising their own young. One of the other things to try and avoid needing to fostering, you'll notice with that yellow rump family that we were just looking at with the spy cam, is that even though they've now got new chicks, which is the blues chicks, the sort of older siblings, or they're not really siblings, they would be step siblings, but I've left in the cage. And the reason I've done that is that they can then observe the parents, they can see them hatch the eggs, they can see them feed the young, and the hope is that then they will learn any missing sort of instinct that they might have had. If they're missing anything, they can observe the parents and learn from them. So hopefully that clutch of 5 will make exceptionally good parents going forward because of the fact that they know what to do. So that's the kind of thinking around there. Coming back to the Bengalese or society finches, just an interesting experiment I did many years ago, and it was before I got into Gouldians. I took this pair of society finches and I wanted to experiment with their instinct to foster. So I ended up with a pair of cocks, and you wouldn't expect them to raise young at all because there's no hen around, and they were the only pair in the aviary, so there was no chance that they thought a hen had dropped an egg or something. But what I did is I took, finches generally lay an egg every day, so what I did is I took the eggs that I wanted to foster under the pair of Bengalese cocks, and every day I added 1 egg until I had a complete clutch. And what I found is the 2 cockbirds, each one thought that the other was laying the egg. And when we reached, I think if I remember correctly, it was about 5 eggs, the two cocks started taking turns in incubating, and they successfully hatched the eggs and raised the chicks. So it just shows you how extraordinary society finches are at actually raising a clutch of chicks. So please, I'm not knocking using society finches. I think there's definitely a place for it, like I mentioned with the pied mutation, where I'm trying to establish it. If I had Bengalese, it's something I would consider in that particular case, but I use it for, or I would use it for very isolated situations, and for one sort of generation only. I certainly wouldn't make a habit of it, but I do quite comfortably do what I'm doing this season, where I'm swapping bad parents eggs with good parent eggs after the good parents have bred one round, so that I guarantee that I get some chicks from both families. Hopefully the bad parents will raise the second clutch with of the pairs that I've swapped, but if they don't, it's not the end of the world, because I already have that genetic. So I'm using 2 pairs this year for that. I'm using the yellow rump pair now for the blue, and then after that I'm going to stop them from breeding because I don't want to overtax the hen. And then the other one was Odo and Josephine. I have 7 chicks from them last season. They're first year cocks obviously, so we're playing around with them, but I don't expect too much from them this year. And then I've got a single hen from them. So what I decided to do is, even though it's their first clutch for this season, I've swapped it out with one of the red-headed purple breast pairs, so that we can try and guarantee those genetics, and build up our flock on the red-headed purple breast, that we can then use those in next year's breeding season, or the year after's breeding season, should I say. So that's kind of the plan. Their second clutch, I'll probably let them breed out their own eggs. What I did do though with their first clutch is I swapped it with that red-headed pair, so they still get an opportunity to attempt to raise young, and hopefully then it will stand them in good stead for next season. But if not, it's not the end of the world, because I have plenty of youngsters from Odo and Josephine. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Yeah, I certainly found it quite interesting putting together today, and yeah, I always love the feedback that you guys give me in the comment section on YouTube. So please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already, and give me some feedback and some comments. And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.